welcome to another exciting installment of the Green Thumb Lecture Series. I'm John Schaefer, and I'm from the Harris County Public Library. And today we have a very special treat for you. We have one of our gardening enthusiasts from the Harris County Master Gardeners Association, a very distinguished member who's going to share their expertise with us. Today's topic is growing bulbs in Texas. So definitely something everybody wants to hear about. Before we dive into today's presentation, a couple of housekeeping notes, though. One is we love questions. So please, if you have a question as you're going on, please type that into the comment section, and we will try and answer that live in the broadcast. But if we don't get to it, we will absolutely put it in the comment section and get you an answer. So if you have a question, we will get it answered. And of course, we also have all sorts of master gardeners who are monitoring the chat, and so you might get a lot of links and some really good answers as we go to your questions. Also, I want you to mark your calendars. Our next show will be Heirloom and Pass Along Plants, and that's going to be on September 17th. Heirloom and Pass Along Plants. Really excited about that one as well. As we're closing, or getting close to I know it doesn't seem like the end of the year, but we don't do the last two. We don't do a November and a December show, so it feels like we're rounding the bend to the end. Now, without further ado, let's turn our attention to today's exciting topic: growing bulbs in Texas. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Deborah. Deborah is a retired college instructor of biology and environmental science and a lifelong gardener with many years of experience growing ornamentals and vegetables. Hello, Deborah. How are you today?
Hi, John. Thank you for the introduction.
I'm very excited about this, and I know a lot of people have already started asking questions to me personally. But we are going to go ahead and get into it. So I'm going to turn this over to you. But a reminder that we will be pausing for questions a few times throughout your presentation. So just keep those coming in, and then I will jump in, and when you don't mind, Deborah, and I will and relay those questions to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I want to also thank the Master Gardeners who are helping with this presentation, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Before we get into our topic, I do want to again mention our upcoming Green Thumb presentations. As John mentioned, we're going to have a presentation on heirloom and pass along plants on September 17th. And then we're also going to have our last presentation of 2024 on October 15th on a very hot topic, which is growing in extreme weather, which we all need to know about these days. But today we're going to be talking about growing bulbs, really growing geophytes in Texas. So I'll start by defining that term geophyte, and we'll explain differences in the various types. We'll also talk about how to choose, grow, and store geophytes. And we'll cover some that grow well here in Harris County, and also mention some that are a little bit difficult to grow here. So often when we're talking about geophytes, we use the term bulb, but as you can see, there are many, many types of geophytes. Bulbs are just one type. Technically, a geophyte is a dormant structure that shelters the bud of the plant underground during difficult times when conditions aren't favorable for growth. And then when conditions improve, a shoot develops, roots grow, and the plant will resume life and go through flowering. And then again, when conditions are unfavorable, it will retreat back to the geophyte. So in addition to bulbs, geophytes include things like corms, stem tubers, tuberous roots, rhizomes, and some people even include plants like daylilies that have a fairly fleshy root, which is kind of like a tuberous root. So there are many, many kinds of geophytes. We're going to start by talking about a bulb because that's quite familiar to you. And I want you to think of an onion. You know that an onion has sort of a flat bottom, and that's called the basal plate. That's where the roots grow from. And then if you cut open the onion, you'll see that it has a bud in the center, which is sheltered by numerous scales, which are actually modified leaves. When the bulb sprouts, it will grow up through the top of the bulb and form a stem, leaves, and eventually flower. Included in the group we call bulbs are many familiar plants, onions and their relatives, like alliums, amaryllis, hyacinths, many of the lilies, tulips, daffodils. Those are all true bulbs. Other types of geophytes include things like corms, which look similar to bulbs, but if you cut into a corm, you will find that it's solid. It doesn't have the layers that we see in a bulb. Um, Crocosmia, crocus, gladiolus. Gladiolus probably are the ones that are most familiar to you as corms. A corm is flat on the bottom like an onion, but it's also sort of flattened on top, which kind of makes it challenging to know which direction to plant it. But if you look closely, you'll usually see little vestiges of roots on the basal plate, and will help you orient it and put it in the right direction when you plant it. The corm is usually surrounded by kind of papery, dried leaves that help to protect it. Another type of geophyte are the stem tubers. And again, you're quite familiar with these because potatoes are a great example of stem tubers. Typically, they store a lot of starch and nutrients underground. And along the surface, they have eyes or buds that will form shoots and grow into new plants. In addition to potatoes, caladium also are a type of stem tuber. We also have tuberous roots. These are true roots living underground. Again, they often store starch and nutrients. And near the top of the structure where it narrows down, that area is called the neck, and that's where you will see the buds. So if you are trying to propagate these, you want to make sure that each tuberous root has a bud. In this group, we have plants like dahlias, tuberous begonias, and cyclamen. Rhizomes are another type of geophyte. These are modified stems. They generally are growing horizontally right under the surface of the soil. In the photo, you can see an iris rhizome with the little fibrous roots growing down from the rhizome and the shoot and leaves growing up from the rhizome. So this group includes bearded iris, gingers, canna plants. Those are all examples of rhizomes. Now, do you really need to know the difference? Not really. It helps if you are trying to propagate the plants because there are some differences in propagation. You'll find that bulbs form little side bulbs, offsets that can be separated from the parent bulb. Rhizomes and tubers, like potatoes, could be cut into pieces. You just need to make sure there's a bud on each piece that you plant. Corms develop little cormels along the side. Again, you can separate those, plant them, and they will grow into new plants. Another reason that you might want to know the difference in geophytes is that there are differences in planting depth. But the fact is that you can be a very successful gardener without ever knowing the difference. And if you want to call them all bulbs, that's just fine. Speaking of planting depth, you can see that rhizomes tend to be planted fairly shallowly. If you have bearded iris, for example, you want to plant them right under the surface of the soil. If you plant them just a little bit too deeply, you'll find that they really don't flower. You might get a lot of leafy growth, but no flowers. Others, like some of the corms, like gladiolus, can be planted very deeply. The general rule of thumb with geophytes is that you will plant the structure about 2 to 3 times deep deeper than the diameter of the bulb. So let's say you have a 2-inch tall tulip, you could plant that somewhere between about 4 to 6 inches deep. Now, the fact is that there are many traditional bulbs or geophytes that we would like to grow here in Texas, but they don't grow very well. For example, the traditional big, beautiful Darwin tulips don't like our heat and humidity. So you can still grow them, but you have to treat them as annuals because they're not going to come back. Um, so if you love those kinds of plants, that's great. We can grow them, but we aren't going to have them naturalize and spread like they might do in a colder climate. Now, on the other hand, we're actually very lucky because there are many great geophytes that we can grow as perennials, such as Agapanthus and Amaryllis, cannas, ginger, rain lilies, spider lilies. The list goes on and on. So we might be a little sad that we can't grow some of the traditional northern bulbs as perennials, but we have many, many other choices that we can grow. I'm going to stop here just for a second and see if we have any questions.
Just a couple. You're covering a lot of the stuff that I was going to ask questions about. And I'm going to show my ignorance here. So occasionally, I've been known to purchase, say, garlic or potatoes from the grocery store, and maybe not get to them in time for in a timely manner. And when I go to them, I will notice that they have definitely have some shoots and sprouts and grown. Can at that point in time, can I put them in the ground and plant them for a later date and maybe grow them, or is that too late generally to propagate them?
Oh, you could definitely plant them. But remember, conditions in your kitchen may be different from conditions outside. Um, Things like
That's
garlic and potatoes like fairly cool weather, though. So you might have some success in planting them. Probably not planting them in the middle of summer, but maybe during the cooler times.
Okay. The other question we had was, and this is so many of the bulbs and the rhizomes are all edible. I mean, are all? I mean, not that you would be eating an iris, and I don't know anybody that's eaten tulips before, but are they all? Do they? Is there any that are poisonous, or do they all kind of fall into that category of semi-edible?
Oh no, you would definitely not want to eat some of them. Some of them
Okay,
are poisonous. So
good to know.
when in doubt, don't eat them.
That's always good advice, Deborah. Always good advice. All right, we'll let you get going. We'll come back with more questions in a little bit.
Now, when we choose bulbs or other geophytes, in general, it doesn't really matter what kind you're going to plant. You want to make sure that the structures are firm. You don't want any dents or bruises or soft spots. That's an indication that it's starting to rot. Ideally, you don't want to have any mold on them. In general, you'll find that large and more expensive bulbs are good for growing big, impressive specimen plants. If you choose smaller bulbs, which are less expensive, they're probably better for naturalizing. Again, naturalizing means that we hope they're going to continue to live year after year and spread through the environment. So let's say if I were planting daffodils in a container by my front door, I might choose the really big bulbs for an impressive show. But if I'm just hoping to grow some daffodils in a kind of spot in my garden, I might choose the smaller bulbs. You also want to try to find bulbs that are going to do well in our warm climate. So here are a few references that you can use to learn more about bulbs. We have a fact sheet from AgriLife Extension on bulbs, culture and maintenance. The Garden Club of Houston has a guide, both in book form and also I found this one online. Now, this one is for 2022, and that is the most recent one that I found, but it still has tons of relevant information. I also found a good book that I rely on quite a bit. It's called A Gardener's Guide to Growing Bulbs on the Gulf Coast by Sally McQueen Squire. I was lucky enough to find it for only $2 at a thrift shop. So these are all good references to help you get started. Now, speaking of choosing bulbs, now is the time. Master gardeners don't recommend any specific growers or breeders, but you would want to look for very reputable companies that have a good track record. Some sell online. The Houston Bulb Mart is also coming up. We have really excellent nurseries in the area that also will offer bulbs. I don't know if they're available yet, but certainly you can start ordering online. And specifically, you want to look for companies that specialize in southern bulbs. Some companies have special southern blends of varieties that will do especially well here. It's important to start ordering pretty soon, or start going to your nursery and looking for bulbs pretty soon, because they tend to sell out fairly quickly, at least the most desirable varieties. So to get what you want, now is the time to start choosing your spring bulbs. Now, when we're planting our bulbs, we want to make sure that we have full sun, and that's at least 6 hours of sun per day, up to 8 or more hours of sun per day for most bulbs. Now, later on, I'll talk about a few that are happier in shady areas, but for the most part, bulbs need full sun. Keep in mind also that the amount of sun changes seasonally. So in the photo, you can see they planted daffodil bulbs under deciduous trees. That's a great combination, because in the springtime, when the daffodils are blooming and growing, the trees don't have any leaves. And then as they leaf out, the daffodils have pretty much finished their life cycle. Also, note that the angle of the sun changes throughout the year. So you might have a spot in full sun right now that will be quite shady later in the year. It's a good idea to test your soil before planting anything. You can send a sample to the Texas A&M Soil Analysis Service. Here's the website, and I see they've put it in the chat. This website has information about how to collect samples, and it also has all the forms you need to send in with your soil sample. And it's surprisingly cost effective. The routine analysis is only $12. And it will give you a good idea of the nutrients that are in your soil and whether or not you might need to add something. Even if you have good nutrient levels, it's always a great idea to add organic matter, because that helps improve soil structure. It can improve drainage, and it will also provide some nutrients. Now, one thing that people often recommend that you add to soil when you're planting bulbs is bone meal, because it's a good source of phosphorus. But I have found that bone meal and some of the organic fertilizers attract pests like squirrels, which dig up my bulbs. This has been a real problem with tulip bulbs in particular. So what I did is I went to one of the dollar store types of stores, and I bought what I think are waste baskets. They're sort of a wire mesh, and I just flip them over and put them on top of my the bulbs I've planted, and I usually hold them down with some irrigation staples, and that keeps them in place. And that way my tulips have a chance to grow without being dug up by all the squirrels. But in particular, they are attracted by bone meal and some of the smellier organic fertilizers. For any geophyte, again, there are always exceptions, but for most geophytes, you need good drainage. You want to dig the beds when the soil is fairly dry, because if you dig wet soil, it tends to compact it. There are a couple of ways that you can plant bulbs. If you have a garden that's basically empty, you can dig a big trench and then place all of the bulbs and then cover them up. But if you have an existing garden bed which has other plants growing there, then you will need to dig individual holes. Now remember that for some of the geophytes, we need to plant them pretty deeply. So it's a good idea to dig down the soil about 8 inches or so, work in any organic matter and fertilizers that you're using. And overall, you want to have a nice, loose soil. Again, organic matter will help keep it more fluffy and less compacted. But again, for almost all geophytes, you want to have good drainage. They're going to tend to rot in soggy soil. Bulbs also will grow very well in containers. And many of us grow bulbs indoors in pots. We go through a process called forcing. When we bring them into our warm houses, they often will bloom sooner than they would in the garden. So you can also plant bulbs outside in containers. Just make sure, again, that you have kind of a fluffy soil with good drainage, and you don't want to let it dry out completely. So keep the soil moist, and you'll have good success. After you plant any kind of geophyte, you want to water to help the soil settle around the structure. You don't want air pockets because then roots cannot form. So water both to remove the air pockets and also stimulate root growth. Now keep in mind that even though you may not see any shoots on the surface of the soil, a geophyte is probably growing roots underneath. So don't let them dry out completely. Make sure that you're keeping adequate moisture so those roots can develop. It's usually a good idea to water early in the morning. Often rainwater will provide enough moisture, but if we go through a dry spell, it's a good idea to continue to provide some moisture. After the plants bloom, it's important also to keep watering because the foliage will continue to grow for often several weeks. And that's the time when the plant is photosynthesizing and storing lots of starch in the geophyte. Really, you're setting it up for the next year, so you'll have success growing it again, if possible. Mulch is always a good idea. In winter, we can put about 2 to 4 inches of a nice organic mulch onto the soil surface, something like composted pine bark, pine straw, composted leaves. These all will help provide a nice mulch on the surface to help retain moisture and moderate soil temperature. And an organic mulch is eventually going to break down and help add nutrients to the soil. You want to kind of pull back mulch once the geophyte starts to sprout, though, because you want to make sure that light is able to reach the shoot and the developing leaves. And also, you don't want that organic matter in direct contact with the growing plant. It could promote rot. So once you see the sprouts, just pull back the mulch a little bit, a couple of inches, and give the plant a little bit of room to grow, a little bit more air circulation. Now, some of the flowers of geophytes can be quite large and may need to be staked. But remember that they often have fairly large bulbs, so you have to be careful in placing the stake that you don't drive it right through the geophyte. After the flowers bloom, it's usually a good idea to cut them off to deadhead. And that way the plant isn't putting energy into creating seeds. It will send its energy down to the geophyte. The foliage, as I mentioned, is going to continue to grow for a period of time. and it can flop over and it will probably start to yellow, and people often get upset about that because it's not that attractive. Um, some people even resort to braiding the leaves of their daffodils, or I've seen people uh, kind of clump them together with a rubber band. If you have time to do that, that's great, but it's really not necessary. Um, it's important to leave that foliage in place as long as it's still green and photosynthesizing and sending food to the geophyte. Definitely cut and remove the foliage after it has died. Now, the way I deal with the sort of unattractive foliage is I just put in more plants, and that way, as they grow, they're helping to kind of camouflage the less attractive leaves of the geophytes. Now, some people will dig up and store their geophytes that they're trying to grow again the next year. This is especially true for people who live in colder climates. Plants like dahlias will often freeze if left in the ground. But here we don't really have to worry about that. The one geophyte that I might lift out of the ground would be caladium tubers, because they can tend to rot in cold soil. But if you do decide to lift, in other words, dig up and store some sort of geophyte, you want to wait until it's gone through its life cycle and the leaves are yellowing. You can use a spading fork to lift the bulbs from the soil. And then you want to store them in a cool place, say 60 to 65 degrees. You want to make sure it's pretty dry. So probably a garage or a garden shed wouldn't be the best place, but maybe you could find a spot in your house. You can put them in sawdust, vermiculite, perlite to help prevent desiccation. And then with some of these, if you're trying to regrow them the next year, hyacinth and tulip bulbs do require chilling before you plant them. Again, most of our tulips we just treat as annuals. We don't try to keep them going the next year. Now, planting time is very crucial for success with geophytes. So we have a couple of different groups of geophytes. There are those that flower in the summer. Usually they get started around early summer and may keep going until fall. And then we also have a group that start blooming about this time of year, late summer until frost. So for these bulbs, we usually plant them in the spring. I use holidays to sort of remind myself about when I should be planting various kinds of geophytes. For example, gladiolus corms and canna rhizomes can usually go in the ground as it starts to warm up, about late February or so, and through April, May. So I kind of use St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, as a way for me to think about planting those kinds of geophytes. There are some, like caladium tubers, that really shouldn't go in the ground until it's quite warm. That's usually around May 1st. There is a way to get a jump on the season with caladiums, though. You can start them in pots ahead of time, and then put the plants that are growing out into the garden around May 1st. And then for some, which we call lycoris or spider lilies, generally those would be planted right about now, maybe starting July, August, September, October. They really like hot soil. A great way to be even more accurate about when you plant is to find out the soil temperature. So you can use a soil thermometer, or even better, you can go to this website, which will generate a map for you depending on your zip code. And you can find out exactly what the soil temperature is on a given day. It will also give you a 24-hour average. and a 5-day average so you can start to see the trends. So I think I got this map on early November. I was curious about whether the soil was cool enough to plant my daffodils. And in early November, the soil was still 75 degrees Fahrenheit, so much too warm for daffodils. So it let me know I had to wait a while. Again, I use holidays to remind myself about when to grow these various bulbs. So Halloween is a good time to think about planting some of the what we call minor bulbs like crocus or freesia. Around Thanksgiving, I start to think about planting my alliums and daffodils. And then for tulips, which should have been chilling in the fridge for 8 to 10 weeks, I usually remind myself to start planting them around New Year's Day. Again, though, you can be more accurate by checking the soil temperature. So let's stop here and see if we have any more questions.
Well, first off, I want to say New Year's Day planting. I mean, what if you were up late the night before? Can you do it maybe the second, maybe July?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
So these are just little reminders as we go through our busy lives that, oh yes, maybe I should think about planting those tulip bulbs which have been chilling in the fridge for 10 weeks.
Got it. Got it. Got some great questions coming. Suma off Facebook wanted to know, and you've kind of talked about this just right now. This is very appropriate. What is the best time to plant garlic and onion in our region? Is it spring or fall, or garlic
Uh,
and onion?
yeah, generally we plant those as the soil cools down. And maybe one of our master gardeners can put in a link to our veggie planting calendar that we
Okay.
have on the Master Gardener website, because that will give you planting times for onions, garlic, really all the veggies that you might want to plant.
Okay.
So not yet, way
Not
too
yet.
hot yet. Yeah.
Also, talking about soil, you mentioned the soil testing, which I think is, of course, really kind of the best thing that nobody's doing. Is one of the, not enough people are testing their soil, because it really is easy, and it's not expensive, and you can get so much great information. But you're just now talking about the temperature of soil. Is there any way that you can, test that yourself, like is there a thermometer? I mean, is that something you can? I mean, how do you? I mean, if you happen to have one of those automatic temperature gauges, can you point that at the soil, or how deep do you go? Do you know for that?
With the devices, the soil thermometers that you buy, you actually put down into the soil.
Okay.
And certainly you can purchase those. But I find that the soil temperature map is so much easier
Okay.
uh, because it's quite accurate.
Oh, good. Okay.
And
Good.
as
I
I
hadn't
mentioned,
even.
it gives you averages over periods of time. So
There you go. There you go. And also, you mentioned, like, that in our area that the cold weather doesn't really bother. But what about, should we happen to have like a freeze like we did a few years ago? Is a short burst of a cold spell like that? Would that do it? Would that cause some problems?
again, it would depend on the type of geophyte. But really, that's the point of most of them, is that they're going to be sheltered underground, and typically our soil doesn't freeze.
Okay.
It might freeze above ground. And you might have experienced that where you lost things like your gingers or your cannas or something like that during one of the freezes, but then they regrow, don't they?
Yeah.
Because their rhizome or corm or whatever it might be is underground and it's sheltered.
Let's see. We got one more question here. Question real quick. Michelle wants to know, if I purchase spring blooming bulbs like tulips from store or catalogs, do I have to chill those first, or can I plant them at the appropriate time? Wondering if they have been pre-chilled already.
For the most part, they have not been pre-chilled, and you need to put them in the fridge 8 to 10 weeks. There are some companies that will, if you ask to purchase those pre-chilled bulbs, they do have them available. I think they cost more. Um, but I usually, for tulips, for example, I usually try to order my tulips so that I can put them in the refrigerator by late October, And that way they have a couple of months to chill before planting time in early January.
Okay, so now's a good time to start shopping. All right, start thinking about where you're
Absolutely.
going to go. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll come back to you and we'll get some more questions coming in. We'll let you finish up and we'll catch up with you at the end and I'll get out of your way.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the questions. Let's see. I would like to talk about some of the different kinds of geophytes that you might consider planting. And I'm going to include some that don't necessarily grow very well here, but you might try them. Let's start with allium because they're an example of big, beautiful plants that don't necessarily do very well in Harris County. They're part of the onion family, and some of these alliums, like the gigatium, can grow 4 feet tall, and they have these huge spherical flower heads. Usually they're a purple color, and they're very, very spectacular. They need well-drained soil and full sun. The reason that they don't generally do very well here is because they are some of the last spring bulbs to bloom, which means that they're going to start blooming late in the season, May through June. So your best bet is to try to find a variety like Purple Sensation that blooms a little bit early, and then hope for the best. I would tend to treat alliums more as annuals. Another kind of spectacular one is the Allium schubertii, which has a flower head that looks very much like fireworks. So they're kind of a nice addition. Some people leave the allium heads in their garden even after they dry because they can be quite attractive for a period of time. Another one that does grow well here is Agapanthus, called Lily of the Nile. And again, they have nice big flower heads, usually on a 2 to 5 foot stem. They bring a really pretty periwinkle blue to the garden. Some of them have been bred to have different colors. There are some that are white, a darker blue, which is quite attractive. They have bicolored flowers for some varieties. Um, and even when it's not blooming, they have kind of a nice strap-like leaf, which adds an interesting texture to your garden. This is a type of plant that's pretty easy to divide, meaning that you can dig it up and pull apart the pieces and plant them all around your yard, usually after it cools down from about October through February. One of our favorites to grow indoors, usually around the holidays, are the amaryllis or hippeastrum. These are great bulbs for forcing. That means that we're growing them in pots indoors where it's warmer. And we can get huge, beautiful flowers. They may need to be staked. And then after they bloom indoors, we can also plant them outdoors where they generally will bloom later in the season, usually starting about mid-March through June. In the photograph where you can see the flowers, that was a whole field of hippeastrum growing at Houston Botanic Garden. Another plant that has enormous flowers are the crinum lilies. These often have quite large plants, again, with kind of strappy foliage and great, big, beautiful lily-like flowers, often in a variety of colors. There are varieties that are bicolor, as you see in the photo, pinks, roses, pure white. This plant will tend to naturalize and fill up a space. They like our heat and humidity. People have described them as being tough as mules. So this is a really spectacular geophyte that you can add to the garden. Of course, when we think of bulbs, we always think of daffodils or narcissus. These come in an enormous variety of sizes, colors. Some are fragrant. There are some varieties that bloom quite early, others mid-season, others are later. You don't need to chill these bulbs, unlike the tulips. You can put them into the ground, usually towards the end of November. And some varieties that we could mention include Grand Primo that you see in the photo. Uh, this is a type that has smaller flowers, often a number of flowers, and it's pretty fragrant. Another one like this is Early Cheer. And there are some like Carlton that look more like the typical daffodil with a single flower. Um, I usually just plant a wide variety. And that way I have smaller plants, bigger plants, white flowers, yellow flowers. Some of them, especially Early Cheer, seem to do well here and will naturalize and regrow another year. Now I'm including daylilies in our talk about geophytes. Some people think of them as geophytes because they have pretty fleshy roots. They're sort of like a tuberous root, not as big though. They tend to just be sort of thickened white roots, but they're a great addition to add to your perennial bed along with some of the geophytes because they bring a lot of interest and a lot of color later in the year, usually after the spring blooming bulbs have finished the show. And they come in just an incredible array of colors, yellows, oranges, reds, mauves. Uh, there are people who breed daylilies into just incredible forms and colors. Now, I met a person who found out that I was a master gardener, and she was just starting her gardening journey, and she said, "Oh, I planted a plant the other day, and I think I've killed it because all the flowers died." And she told me she planted daylilies, and I said, "Don't worry, they're called daylilies because the flowers only last for a day, and then others will bloom the next day." But she was doing fine. She wasn't doing anything wrong with her daylilies. They were just doing what they're supposed to. So on a given plant, you might get blooms over a period of about 3 weeks. And if you cut it back pretty severely, it often will regrow and potentially bloom again. Um, like some of the other geophytes, there are different varieties that bloom during different times of the year, early, mid, and late season. And that way you can keep the show going for months with different daylilies. Now, one plant that I learned about later in life were the rain lilies. They belong to genus Hebranthus. Others are in genus Zephyranthes. And like the name implies, they often bloom after heavy rain, especially later in the summer. These in the photo are Labufa rosa, and they were discovered by John Ferry and Carl Schoenfeld in Mexico, and they brought them back to the John Ferry Conservation Garden. There they have a little mound that they dedicate to rain lilies, and it's in full sun. And I haven't found that the rain lilies necessarily do that well there. These in the photo were in a fairly shady spot near their parking lot. And just an incredible array. So I suspect that rain lilies can take a little bit more shade than we might think. They generally are smaller plants. They have sort of a grass-like foliage and then produce these just beautiful blooms after the rain. Hyacinths are another type of geophyte, a bulb that we often can force indoors. And they also will grow pretty well outdoors. They can be chilled in a mesh bag for about 8 weeks in your fridge. You don't necessarily have to chill them. If we have a winter that's fairly cold, they may come back. I had some growing in a pot, and they regrew for about 2 or 3 years after I planted them. But I did notice that it seemed like they were losing energy. They were sort of petering out after the second year. Now, iris are another great type of geophyte that we often try to grow. Uh, the bearded iris are the type that many people love because they have such beautiful, spectacular flowers and incredible variety. And I do have a couple growing in my yard. I'll usually get a couple of flowers each year, but they don't really like our heat and humidity, and they object to our clay soil because they need good drainage, and they're just not the best iris for us. But we're lucky because we can grow other kinds of iris, like the Dutch bulbous iris, or Louisiana iris or Spurria iris. In this photo, you can see some Louisiana iris that were growing in a little bit of water at the Houston Botanic Garden. So this is an exception to the rule. These Louisiana iris actually like to have wet feet, and they can tolerate soil that has poor drainage, or in this case, even a little bit of standing water. Spurria iris, on the other hand, do require good drainage. So you could put your Spurria iris or your Dutch bulbous iris in the dry spot and put your Louisiana iris in that spot in your yard that tends to remain fairly boggy. So you can usually find a geophyte for just about any situation. Lycoris, which are sometimes called surprise lilies or hurricane lilies, often bloom around this time of year, late August to October. They're called surprise lilies because they produce their foliage earlier in the season, and then that dies back. And then suddenly you'll just have this big, spectacular flower growing out of the ground with no foliage. Surprise! Similar are the oxblood lilies that are also late summer bloomers. And tulips. I think we've talked quite a bit about tulips already. This type in the photo, this was taken at the McGovern Centennial Garden in Herman Park. This type is the Darwin tulip, which we treat as annuals here because the bulbs just seem to rot away in the soil. As we mentioned, you would want to put them in the refrigerator for 8 to 10 weeks and chill them before planting around early January. There are other kinds of tulips which look quite different. They're called species tulips, and they tend to be shorter, and they have the typical cup-shaped flower when they're closed, but when the flower opens, they get very, very, very flat. Examples are Tulipa clusiana is a species tulip. The species tulips tend to do better in the South. There is some hope that they will naturalize and come back year after year. So if you want that type of tulip, then you would look for the species type rather than the Darwin type. Now, we can't forget that we grow many geophytes for their foliage rather than flowers, and these are good choices for shadier areas. So in the photo, you can see a beautiful variegated ginger, which is a striking dark green and yellow color. It brings a lot of color to a shady spot, as do the caladiums. Caladiums are bred to have purples and pinks and reds and silvery colors, again, providing a lot of color and interest without flowers. And you can get incredible texture using geophytes like elephant ears or colocasia, which have sometimes just absolutely enormous leaves. So let's always remember that we can use some kinds of geophytes even in shady areas, and they provide a lot of interest to the garden. So I like to think of geophytes as just a great asset to our gardens because if they naturalize, they will come back year after year and provide a lot of color and foliage and interest. They're like old friends that come back and greet us each year. Um, with geophytes, if you add geophytes to your garden, you can often have something in bloom just about any time of the year. Even in cold weather, if you are forcing some geophytes like tulips or hyacinths or amaryllis, you can have geophytes blooming inside, even during the very cold months. So I hope you give them a try and add them to your garden. Do we have any other questions?
We do, we do. I just want to say I didn't know that caladium was considered a geophyte. Here I thought I was a geophyte neophyte, but as it turns out, I was a seasoned. We have caladium in our yard, so I noticed that. Question about waxed bulbs. I know you mentioned coming into the the holiday season as we are a little bit, and I think I got one last year. They've become very popular. I just wanted your opinion on waxed bulbs, and if it's well, I mean, I know there's some controversy. Is it environmentally safe? Is it is it a good way to store bulbs, or what are your thoughts on waxed bulbs
they have become quite popular. The fact is that the geophyte, whether it's a bulb or a corm or what have you, really has just about everything the plant needs to grow and bloom. So a waxed bulb may seem funny because you're not putting it in the soil, but everything that plant needs already is in that bulb. Now, if you wanted to peel off the wax and plant it in your garden, you could try doing that. I'm not sure how successful you'd be, but they'd probably be fine. If you get a regular amaryllis bulb that isn't covered by wax, surprisingly, you put them in tiny pots. You don't really need much soil at all, just enough to sort of hold it in place in a small pot. So again, they really have everything they need. They're ready to go when you plant them.
Good to know. Good to know. Just a quick reminder for everybody, we have a survey that I'm putting in the comment section right now. We would love for you to just cut and paste that into your browser, and you can fill that out as soon as we're finished up here. And we'd love to get your thoughts on everything. So please take the time to do that if you've enjoyed the program. Back to the questions. You mentioned Herman Park is a place that where they have tulips, stuff like that. What are some of your, if we don't have, a lot of these planted right now, but we do want to just go see some great lilies and some geophytes, where do you have some favorite places here in Harris County that you like to go see some?
Yes. I did see those tulips at Herman Park. Houston Botanic Garden, of course, is a great place to visit. See all sorts of plants. As I mentioned, I saw the Louisiana iris there near a lake. Oh gosh, it was spectacular. And they had that huge field of amaryllis. Mercer Botanic Garden is another good one. Not in Harris County, but a great place to see all sorts of different kinds of plants is the John Ferry Conservation Garden near Hempstead.
Okay, that's close by. That's close by, not too far away. And you'd mentioned earlier about we were talking about the waxed tulips and planting them in your garden. Is there any danger of invasive species when it comes to bulbs and things like that you're going to be getting through the mail or as a gift? Is there anything we should watch out for that you know of?
You always want to investigate any plant. There are some elephant ears, for example, that are thugs and can kind of start running around your garden. So I would recommend that if you get a plant as a gift, or if you just purchase something in the nursery, do a little investigation. Generally, most of the well, I can't say that. Some of the geophytes do take over. So I would do a little research before I put it out in the wild.
Good rule of thumb before you put anything in the ground that
Right.
is, know kind of what it is, what it's going to happen, because, it might take over your garden anyway. And it's not, you don't want a yard full of that because, you're talking about the daylilies earlier. I thought, why instead of calling them daylilies, you should call them year-long stems. That way you feel way more successful about the plant, and then you're mostly you got it anyway. Bad gardening jokes. We did have a request for if somebody wanted to maybe hear some more, had some, do you have any contact information that's available, or should go through the Master Gardeners website?
Yeah. Okay. If you go to our website, we have a feature called Ask Master Gardener, and I'm one of the people who answers questions there.
Awesome. And I've actually done that before, and I know you get tremendous answers. Here we go. I'll put that right there. There's a link there for that, right?
Perfect.
That is all we have that I see here. We've had some great questions, and man, I've learned so much about this. Thank you so much, Deborah, for your presentation. We do appreciate it. I think we've seen you before. Do you know if we have you on the schedule to see you again sometime the rest of the year or next year?
Next year, I'm going to give 2 presentations. One will be on sustainable gardening, and the next one will be on plants of the Bible.
Oh, wow. I'm really 2 great programs. Very interested. So I will look forward to those next year. Deborah, thank you so much as always. And we appreciate everybody watching. And you can find the link to the YouTube broadcast or the Facebook and send it to your friends and let everybody know to tune in next month. So let's go on to this. So next month, September 17th at 11 a.m., we'll be discussing heirloom and pass along plants, a must watch for anyone looking to enhance their garden with beautiful, beautiful pass along plants. And thank you again and also a special thanks to our Master Gardener volunteers today, Arcana, Chef, Chev, Martin, Steve, and Joanne. And I think I've got everybody there. If not, I apologize. But other than that, thank you so much, Deborah. We will see you next time. All right.
Thank you.